we go. We're going to go for a ride now because it's going up. It means we're recording. Welcome, everybody, to the Sustainiacs. I am Michael Vincent. I'm always the Sustainiac. My guest Sustainiac this week is Jane Abernethy, and she is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Humanscale. That's right, right?
That's right.
That's right. And, you know, I look on your thing, it said you were a sustainability officer. Now you're the chief sustainability officer. Did you get promoted, or did the entire office just get like, look, this needs to be more serious than it was before?
Maybe a bit of both. I think I
got you.
It was maybe a bit of a recognition of like, hey, this actually is something we're taking seriously. Let's just acknowledge that. It didn't actually make my role change that much.
Right.
Like, you're already doing the work. Let's just put the title with that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So listen, I know what Humanscale does because I've talked to someone in your I don't know if she was lead, but she was lead on a project looking for ocean plastics, right, for procurement. So I know a bit about Humanscale, but most like regular consumers don't, because that's not really kind of your market, is it? Or you give me the lowdown. Give us the lowdown on Humanscale.
Yeah, so we design and manufacture ergonomic office tools, and what that means in practice is like chairs that keep you in a healthy, comfortable body posture, height adjustable tables, things that keep your monitor at the right height so you don't get neck pain. A lot of us are sitting at desks, doing a lot of work for many hours a day, both in offices, at our workplace, but often at home as well. And the body posture that we have over time, it really affects our health. Lots of musculoskeletal issues come up with people, and we are working to try to prevent those. So then we basically manufacture, sometimes we call it furniture, but there's kind of more to it than that. So the shorthand would be like office furniture is often the world we're sort of working within.
Yeah, no, I get it. If you said office furniture, I'd be looking for just chairs and some desks and maybe a credenza or something like that. But like you said, you described a whole lot of other things that are very, very important, right? And furniture, like you said, with all the ergonomics and back pains and this, and hey, you should stand 24/7, or you should lay down 24/7, or you should sit on a bouncy ball, or whatever, all these other things. They are actual tools. 14 years of football and 58 years, 58 times around the sun. I need different types of tools while I'm working, right?
Yeah. It's definitely that. Like day one, day two might not make too much of a difference, but it adds up over time. It's going to make a huge difference in your quality of life. So yeah. So it's exciting. I like working for a company where we're trying to make people healthier, trying to make people more comfortable, trying to, improve people's quality of life. And then I personally get to work on that while we do this, can we actually make a positive impact on the overall environment? Can we make a positive impact?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I want to get into that is, okay, so you're the sustainability officer, right? And we're going to get into you and how you got there and do all that kind of stuff, because very, very interesting. But okay, so we talked about, just the benefits of the office tools and workspace tools that you mentioned, the height and all this type of thing. How is that? That's not sustainability, though. So where does the sustainability come into it?
Yeah, so we're manufacturing. So manufacturing, you're making things, using resources, making the same thing, but like hundreds of thousands of times a year, right? So it's actually a pretty big leverage point. And then we have a supply chain that we influence because we design the products. We decide what kind of materials are going to be used. We decide who to work with as suppliers, how to ship the products. And a lot of those decisions just get repeated again and again and again. So when we scale up looking at mass production, it's a kind of a great leverage point. And to me, it seems really important to be paying attention to how we're making decisions, because these are the kind of decisions, like as a consumer, like as me personally as an individual, I can kind of influence the world a little bit with my decision making and my purchasing.
Sure.
But like if I can influence my company to purchase a different way, that's a lot more purchases and a lot more volume of just leverage.
It's a lot more difficult too, because as a consumer, within reason, it's pretty easy to choose this over that, right? Within my economic means. Correct?
Yeah, it is more definitely, it's a bigger project.
Yeah, well, I have a much smaller group of stakeholders and shareholders that I need to take care of, right?
Yeah.
And there's many out there that they're the only stakeholder. You got a whole company that you've got to try and make more sustainable, yet stay profitable and have returns for the investors, et cetera, and all the stakeholders. And also, by the way, make a product that people want to keep buying at the price level and at the quality that they're going to expect from Humanscale. Because Humanscale, you don't go to Humanscale and buy a bunch of folding chairs for church potluck dinner. That's not what you guys make.
Yeah, we warranty our chairs for 15 years, so they're high quality products that last.
Yeah, that's
over
what
time.
I'm saying. This is higher end stuff. This is high quality products and stuff. So when I look at it, you guys do have sustainable products. From the words of it has reclaimed materials inside the products, right? This is a very small part of what you do, though, right? I mean, as far as a sustainability officer, that's like, okay, that's cool, but there's a myriad of other things you got to worry about as a sustainable officer, right? But let's go ahead.
So yeah, definitely. And that can get really overwhelming and daunting and confusing. People will be coming up to me, like, I'll have so many different conversations. And I do remember at one point, one of my colleagues being like, what exactly do you do? Like, today you're talking to me about Chrome 6. Yesterday we were talking about child labor in the supply chain. And now you're talking about like whether we turn the lights off or like how we manage the air compressor. So it can seem like really different topics. Then we did find it was helpful to get everyone facing the same direction, really have a clear vision. And so our vision for ourselves is, can we manufacture and be a for-profit company and leave the world better off? And that's kind of the top level, but still fairly abstract vision, but we're really excited about. Usually, as people assume, manufacturers are going to do damage, and then they're really happy when you like do less of it. But you're still doing damage, right? You're still going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
You're just not going as fast. So our thought was, can we actually be a for-profit company, manufacture goods, and leave the world better because we're here? And then we had to say, okay, better how? And we broke it into these 6 pillars. And so those are like climate and energy, circularity, healthy materials, like not using toxins, social responsibility, water, wildlife. Yeah, that's 6, water and then wildlife. And so that at least gives us like, here are the pillars of the program. So then it makes sense, like why one day we might be having a conversation about making sure or how do you even know if there's child labor in your supply chain? That's in that pillar of like social responsibility. And then another day we can be having a conversation about, do we have Chrome 6 or, other toxins in the product? That's in the healthy materials pillar of kind of all the work that we do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's, any one of those little topics is a massive undertaking to just understand if the issue is there. Because I assume, like you're saying, like Chrome 6, and you've got all these different materials. I assume you're not getting them all from the guy down the street. This is an international procurement, right? And supply chains.
Yes. Yeah. So we do have a complex.
So even though you're buying something like you see people, you buy textiles from like say Vietnam, right? But those carbon fibers could be coming from a restricted zone out of a certain Chinese province that is considered to be forced labor, right?
Right. Yes, that is a possibility. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, although unlikely in textiles, but yes, it does feed into many other products. Oh, are we freezing again? Is that me?
Yeah, no, we're good.
Okay.
We are good. We're talking through these different supply chains, et cetera. So what are the products that you guys are making that are, that you market as sustainable? Let's hit that first. You have ocean, I think it is, that type of stuff, right?
Yeah, so we do have ocean plastic in a number of our chairs. We started with one. This is usually how I've approached it, and kind of then that's how our company approaches it, is I'll start somewhere and then expand from there. So start small, pilot, test, grow from there. Never with the idea that this is going to be the one sustainable thing and then the rest of the business will be however it is and we'll just focus on the one thing we can talk about. It's really always with the aim to implement, systematically. So for example, like what we had, our first 2 products that we had certified for the Living Product Challenge, certified climate positive. available only from one factory. And then, 3 years later, we scaled it up to 26 products from all of our factories, all of the Humanscale factories globally.
Okay.
And now we've been adding more products to that. So that represents, just for perspective, about 70% of the products that we sold last year. So it's not all yet, but it's really scaling up to be a lot of products that are climate positive. Red list, like chemicals, free of chemicals of concern, audited to those claims. We also have like the ocean plastic, where we sourced, material from the ocean, launched it in our first task share back in 2018, and then, scaled up. And now we have, I think, 3 or 4 task shares with ocean plastic in them on the marketplace, continuing to scale up and work with additional suppliers. So it's really, when we start somewhere, it's never the end goal to say, this is going to be the sustainable chair or the sustainable product. It's really about proving concepts so we can quickly scale up.
I got you. So that's a little bit better. So do you have to go back through design, and how does that kind of work to be able to, because you just to say, okay, we're going to put some sustainable, we're going to get rid of, I guess you're talking about like forever chemicals and harmful chemicals and stuff like that, PFAS and that
carcinogens, PFAS.
Yeah, you're talking about removing all that kind of stuff. But then you're also adding, like ocean plastics. Now, these are not easy things to do, right? Because ocean plastics can be highly degraded and make things even worse if you don't know what you're doing. So it's not like just saying, hey, all right, let's just dump in 20%. There's a bit of chemistry that has to be done there. There's a lot of testing that has to be done there. What are some of those hurdles to go through just to do something like that?
Yeah, interestingly, so it took us about 2 years to go through we're going to try it and then launch the product to the market. It took about 2 years. Some of those were testing the strength of the material and making sure that it would still, we were using them in products that already existed, so we weren't affecting the physical shape of the components, if that makes sense. So we couldn't thicken the walls to make them stronger, for example.
Right.
And so part of that was, the cycle testing, making sure that the material we got, still met the criteria. Initially it didn't, but we found ways of processing the material and drying it certain ways so that it actually could still meet our criteria. I don't get a pass from our quality team or any of our marketing folks on like the product can perform less because it has sustainable materials going into it. It still has to meet all of our quality claims. So that's kind of interesting. But in some ways, I think that's good, is that like we still have to meet all of that and put that quality product out there. And another interesting hurdle, besides the processing of the material, that I thought was really interesting and unexpected, was not a technical one, but it was just getting people to think differently about the material. So the initial conversations, and we worked with a group called Borreo, who is more at the front end with the fishing communities, gathering back the fishing nets. Those initial conversations, like the folks in the communities thought of it as garbage, and they were like very skeptical that anyone would want that material because it had been a problem for them and garbage in their community for decades. And so overcoming some of that like skepticism and proving that it wasn't just a one-off odd thing to do, it was going to be a systematic part of our logistics was that was kind of an interesting conversation. And then the other thing was that the material had then been deemed waste, and we had a hard time moving it from place to place where it needs to get processed. So like, a lot of the material initially was captured around Chile, on the coast of Chile. And then, our processing isn't all in Chile. We sell globally. We work with a lot of suppliers globally. So we would be injection molding this in different places. If we want to then import it to other countries, they'd say, well, it's waste. We don't want to import that material, which was kind of amazing because it was like, we want to use it. It's the inputs to the products that we want to make. But, you have to think about the material differently. And when you really unpack it, like there is no waste. It's just that somebody puts a label on something. That makes it
but
waste.
it's people trying to do the right thing, but they're doing it wrong and they're doing it in haste. So they're putting out these laws, to try and prevent, mismanaged waste, and it prevents people from actually solving issues, right?
Yeah, you're right. They probably do have good intentions, and there is an issue of mismanaged waste going to different countries. So I get, that does make sense.
It just makes it a pain in the butt. These are the kind of
hurdles that.
So how do you some of those, like, there's people that, I'm in the plastics and recycling business, this, and doing this type of stuff. So some of those are just, barely process it, just do enough to the plastic film. And then then we can export it as processed plastic to, India or China. That happens on the West Coast constantly. It's like, well, just wash it a little bit and we'll call it processed. Oh, okay. I mean, there's ways that people get around those type of things, you know what I'm saying? But people need to understand that, because what you said, and when you unpack it for the consumer and the person that's out there, there's people out there that they really want to do good, right? And they really want to be good stewards of the planet, and they really want to buy materials and support companies like Humanscale, et cetera. And that's why that's purpose of this show, is to get people to understand what it takes to get these things done and what it means. And one of the things that you said is, and I hear it all the time, and it's true, is the consumer wants you to do this, but they're not going to pay more for the same product. And they're not going to pay the same amount for a lesser quality product just because it's better for the earth. They're just not. I mean, you can see all the studies. MIT's done them, Harvard Business Review. I've seen them all, Columbia, everybody. Smart. I mean, these are established. And they'll tell you 64 to 80%, depends on what, generation they're from, will tell you they'll spend up to 10% or more for a product that is sustainable over when it's not. But then when it comes down to actually buying it, they don't.
Yeah, I think people can answer the questions differently than what they actually do
100%.
in practice. So
100%. Yeah, and that's what people need to understand, is that one of the hurdles are the people that actually are demanding the products, and they're demanding the recycled content at the exact same time. Now, it's interesting to me, because you talk about that and you bring that in there. So the fishing nets, those are the best. Those are the nylons, right? Like the NA6 and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So those are the specific ones. And why those out of the ocean? Are the other ones just you don't use a lot of the like HDPE or PP, or is it just the nylon is better as a better ocean waste plastic than the others? Because some of them degrade really rapidly and they're just not useful, right?
Yeah. So the ocean plastic. I mean, we started with nylons nets, partly because they are the most harmful kind of ocean plastic. Like they really continue to ghost fish and land on coral reefs.
Yeah, ghost nets are terrible. Yeah, yeah.
It's really so and like I think sometimes it might seem strange, like what does a task share in the office space have to do with the oceans? But ultimately, what kind of the connector is health, because at least the expression that I've heard is that every second breath you take comes from the ocean, just the amount of like oxygen that is produced by the ocean. So if we care about
people don't understand, the ocean is responsible for the vast majority of our oxygen. It is not the Brazilian rainforest. The rainforest is important. The ocean is our oxygen.
Yes, absolutely. So if we care about our health and if we want to breathe air, and that's, I think, everyone alive, then we care about the oceans. And so that's we really have to start taking care of them.
Put me down for that. The other thing is, the interesting thing, and I learned this, and I'm going to give you this person's name. I'm just going to plug them right now. Net Your Problems. Go look it up. People support them. They're awesome. Nicole Paker is amazing. But I'll connect you with her if you're not already connected, because you guys should be connected. But these fishing nets, people think of, when they think of like a fishing net, they think of some guy standing in a river or whatever and throwing out a seining net or something like that, right? These are 20,000 pound nets. A piece that we're talking about. Massive, massive commercial fishing nets, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're huge.
So the logistics, how do you overcome the logistics? I mean, that's the other part of it. Like you talked about circularity, right? That's one of your 6 pillars. I think it was the second one, right? Was that right?
Yeah. There's no hierarchy. I just say that in whatever order.
But it was the second one you mentioned, was circular. There's no hierarchy. So I got wildlife, water, society, circularity,
climate and energy,
and
then the last one is healthy materials, like not using
materials, climate and energy. So circularity is difficult because now you're talking about your chairs going end of life and back into the system, right? I mean, it obviously a circle, right? But you're just the logistics of bringing the nets into it, which is it's circularity, but not in your product, but that's just as important as circularity within your own product, right? And maybe even it's pretty difficult as well. I mean, that's just to do that, even if you could use 100%, right? Just old fishing nets, right? for your product and make your product out of it. You wouldn't be able to afford it, would you? I mean, the logistics have to be tremendously expensive.
You know what we do find is it is a little bit complicated. So we worked. I'm going to plug Borreo. They're a great group that work with ocean plastic and fishing nets. You might know them already, but we started this journey with them, and one of the big priorities was to make sure that the people collecting the nets were creating viable businesses for themselves in their communities, and that they were having a positive impact on the community. So they weren't just barely getting by and staying like living below the poverty line and living like just barely eking a living out, collecting this material, but they actually had viable businesses that were a benefit to their communities. So that drove the price that then sort of flowed through. And I feel like that's important.
I agree with you 100%. Depending on human altruism is not good.
No,
because it's fleeting. Human altruism is good, but it's fleeting. It changes. It sees something shiny and flickers and changes, and your supply chain's all messed up. And you got to have a reliable supply chain. So I applaud you. That's 100% right. It's got to be a viable business process. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Yeah,
and that's not greed. It's just they have to live.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. It makes perfect business sense. But that, I think, is one of the bigger drivers to make sure that the price is something that, like, where the price lands. So yeah, it is always a bit of there's a million things that affect it. I'm sorry that my answer is not so like cut and dry, but one of the other things that really affects it is the price of oil, which that affects how much things get recycled in general. And that affects kind of the price of plastics. So there's all these moving pieces. And as time goes by, in this moment in time, I could probably dig into it and figure out like how the price stacks up today, but it'll change. So it's
and that's an
it
interesting
does cost more,
point.
But it's not clear exactly how much more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, and I don't think, and I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think a little bit more discussion to clarify it for the audience and stuff I think is important, because I don't think people think of it that way. They think of, well, just use this material instead of that material. Okay, well, if you're making things out of, dirt, there's dirt, okay? There's just dirt. Or if you're making things out of steel, there's steel, all right? Now, if you're making things out of plastic, there's recycled plastic, but then there's virgin plastic. There's two different markets here. And within the recycled market, there's 1,000 different markets because there's different types. There's ocean, there's non-ocean, there's green circle certified, there's post-consumer, post-industrial. It's coming from India, it's coming from Southeast Asia, it's coming from the United States, coming from wherever it happens to be, right? It's a consistent supply, it's an inconsistent supply. There's so much brokering going on.
How much has it been degraded? How much has it been
degraded, right? And then you've got to test it. Is it the actual stuff that we have now? Because virgin plastic, I can just call up somebody and say, here's my spec sheet, make it for me. Yeah. And they'll make exactly the chemical construction that I need and the exact colors, et cetera, and the exact quantities. Or I need to try and do what you're doing with fishing nets, which is trying to find that exact nylon that I need in the right colors, at the right price, at the right time, and compete against, somebody's making virgin nylons and it's cheaper.
So one of the things we've done to try and address that is we've started insourcing a lot of our processes so that we are injection molding the components directly ourselves. We had previously these components had been injection molded by our suppliers, and so these were just there's just a lot of different levers to pull. The system gets kind of complex when we're looking at manufacturing them, but that's one of the things we've been doing, which has been nice because then we can scale it up a lot easier because we know the material and how to process it. And then if we go to the next set of components, now that we're the ones making those components, it's easier for us to scale up. We don't have to go to another supplier and teach them how to use the material and get them on board. And there's always a learning curve, and that has to do with building that relationship, which is, again, people. So it simplifies things a bit.
So are you hybrid now, in-house, out and outsourced?
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense because one way, 100% one way and 100% the other way just is not right? You don't want to do all the manufacturing in-house. That's just not cost effective.
There's no reason we should make screws, for example. Folks do that all day, every day.
Excuse me. That was funny. You're exactly right. You don't own your own screw factory, of course. And we're producing our own paints and our own pigments and everything.
Yeah, exactly. We still do have a supply chain, but we're insourcing more things so that we can control the big things that matter the most.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how difficult does the same thing translate, like you said, using healthier materials, like you're saying, like things that are carcinogens or trying to get rid of the PFAS and forever chemicals and all that other kind of thing? Is that as difficult as the fishing nets? It seems like it'd be like, hey, look, just stop using these chemicals or whatever, but it has to be in my brain, in my intuition, or it just seems it has to be a bit more difficult than that, because you're talking about these chemicals are used for a reason, right? They're not just thrown in there for the hell of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Honestly, I do find it a lot more challenging than using ocean plastic. it's
more challenging than using the ocean plastic.
Yeah, I'd say
like
scales of magnitude more challenging. So one of the first questions, if you're going to say, can you make sure we don't have carcinogens in this product, is you have to first understand, what do you have in that product and what's a carcinogen? And when you say, what do you have in that product, we will often buy, like, let's say we buy screws or we buy like a knob from a supplier. That supplier, if they're sending us an injection molded component, they don't usually formulate that plastic. They just buy it and injection mold it to the shape we ask them to. We go to them and say, like, can you tell us who sold you the plastic? And then they often bought it from a broker. And then so we go to the broker and say, like, who did you get this plastic from? So we can go fairly deep into the supply chain before we come across who's formulating that material. And then we have to ask them, can you give us your recipe for that material? And they sometimes generally they'll not say yes immediately. So we have like some conversations and negotiation and education. And they sometimes will then say, sure, as long as you sign this NDA and don't tell anyone what's in the material. And then we come back with, no, our plan is actually to share all this information publicly. We actually publish all the ingredients for all our products. And by all, I mean, last year it was 86% of the products had, full ingredients labels.
Really?
And so then we have to have another round of negotiation with the legal teams. And so it can be a lot of process just to get that information to say what's in the product. And so then let's say we get all that information for every single material on every single component. We even get the recipe for the paints and the coatings that go on the screws to make sure we know what's in all of the materials. And again, I don't use the superlative lightly. I feel like, these statements need to be quantified a little bit. So by all,
yeah, they do.
We go down to 100 parts per million of the product. So we go down to 0.1% of the product. If it's under 0.1% of the product, we might not know about it. But that gives us a very, a good amount of information. And then we can say, hey, of what's in the products, which ones are carcinogens? And we say, oh, this component has a material that's a carcinogen, and then we can go to that supplier and start to make the change. I'll use an example of our casters. We found out that the caster we specified, we didn't design that caster, it's an existing component. And so that caster, the spindle that goes from the caster into the chair, kind of pokes up into the chair, had a chrome 6 coating on it. So we went to that supplier and said, can you change your processing, get different equipment, use a different coating? And then it took it took a good amount of negotiating. They agreed to it. They changed their processing. They can't set up multiple runs of these things, so they changed it for everything. And then we did the cycle testing, make sure it still meets the cycle testing. That took, about 9 or 10 months just to have it cycle through all the wear, make sure it meets our warranties. And then we moved it to the new coating. And of course, when we made that change with the supplier, they then also changed their systems, not just applying to us, but every other, not just furniture, but in all the folks that are buying from them. So it was a really big change that got made. That gets repeated, millions and millions of times in mass production. So that's one instance of a chrome 6.
In that one instance, though, let's expand on that just for a second. That one instance that you just spoke about now impacts everybody that buys from that person now. So you've now positively impacted a whole bunch of other products and other companies, right?
Yeah.
By you leading the charge,
really
saying, will you change that?
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes.
So that's the leverage I'm talking about. When you ask manufacturers to change, those changes are repeated. And it's hard to change one thing for one person. They end up being systematic changes. So it ends
Yeah.
up being larger leverage points. So that's what's really exciting about it. And, then that came to fruition. All the other R&D projects and negotiations that were trying to eliminate Chrome 6 came to fruition in 2019. So we've eliminated Chrome 6 from all our products as of 2019. And by all, again, I mean all the products that Humanscale designs and manufactures. We have a couple
Yeah,
of OEM products.
right. But what you're not counting is all the products that they make for other people that now don't have Chrome 6 in them as well.
Yes,
Right. I
yeah,
mean,
exactly.
if you could get auditable data on that, you could claim that as, hey, we did that. Right. I mean,
Yeah,
it'd be accurate.
I suppose, yeah, it would be true. We never tried to get like data from them on that, but that's true. So that's kind of how healthy materials shakes out, is that there's a lot of data, there's a lot of relationship building, there's a lot of, and then you need to do an R&D project. It's not like we changed nylon 6 for nylon 6. We had to figure out how to process it differently and build some relationships. But that's a relatively straightforward conversation to say, this is a carcinogen, what are we going to do instead? And try to, figure that one out, and then get everyone on board to do a different thing that still meets our 15-year warranty. It's harder.
Yeah.
It's
and
definitely
then
harder.
they say, yeah, I'll change this for you. You can invest in my new manufacturing line.
Well, luckily,
I
we're
mean,
just convinced that we'll be a good customer for long enough, and they
yeah, I
didn't
mean,
ask
that's
for that.
what
So,
I'm
but
just saying. I mean, my first
exactly,
reaction is going to be, are you insane?
yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah,
but I really think that this is important to use healthy materials because it ties so closely into the circular economy. If we are
100%.
using, and manufacturers in general are using carcinogens, reproductive toxins, things that are bioaccumulative in their products, and then we say, hey, can you keep using those materials? Then we keep surrounding ourselves with the carcinogens and all these toxins that we didn't want in the first place.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting conversation because this is something that I've been, and I'm not taking credit for it. I just agree with 100%. Lots of people discuss this, and obviously you live it every day. Is circularity and sustainability starts with product design.
It does, and it doesn't end with it either. So I do feel like I feel like I need to loudly shout from the rooftops or whatever that just because someone says we designed for circularity, they say it like they've taken care of the problem and it's done. So far from done. Yes, design for circularity, absolutely important, and that means not glues, not screws, or screws, not glues. Like making things disassemblable, separate materials being able to be separated, not using toxins, using really simple parts, not using a lot of different materials. Consolidating things. All of that's very important. But then you need to set up a system to take it back and actually make it happen in practice. And that's the part that I'm really excited about these days.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. You have to have the ability to recycle it. I mean, you've got like California and stuff, right or not. You could be on one side or the other. I don't care. I'm on my side is they're wrong, but telling people you can't put, recyclable on certain products, but their litmus test is that they don't recycle it. The product is recyclable, but they don't recycle it, so you can't say it's recyclable. That doesn't make any sense to me.
It's tricky because then how is anyone ever going to recycle it?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Like, if you pick up something plastic and it doesn't say recyclable, that's a lie because it is 100% recyclable. Doesn't matter what kind of plastic it is recyclable.
Yeah, almost everything can be recycled in some way. If you can find a way to use it, then you can recycle it.
Exactly. So, I mean, just if you've got it, it is recyclable. It's just, does somebody have the infrastructure to do it is really the question.
The incentive. Is there going to be a market for that material?
Exactly. The incentive to go do it. And the consumer is the incentor in many ways. But also there are others. And that's what I wanted to ask you is the efforts that you guys have in place. And I'm not questioning the motivation in any way, shape, or form. Don't take it that way. Obviously, you're sincere in there. What I'm asking is, you're an international company, right?
Yes.
I mean, you sell your plastics, or you sell your plastic. You sell your products are sold across the globe, right? So you have certain standards you have to meet in certain countries or European unions, for instance, that have different standards than the United States, and each state has different standards, et cetera. EPR legislation is what I'm talking about here, right? And so navigating through those waters has to be some sort of motivation or pressure to do this as well, right? Because as states, you can't sell certain. Do you see that at all, or do you not see that type of pressure at all? I'm asking a question because you have to be at certain levels to do business in Europe, and you don't have to in, say, Tennessee. Nobody cares in different areas, et cetera. So how are those pressures work and those differences? Is it?
Yeah, I don't know if my experience can be representative across the board. So I'm just going to put the caveat that this is what I've seen as my experience in this role, is that it does seem like so far when one of those extended producer responsibility laws come into effect, very quickly the producers get together and say, hey, it's not really useful for us to each do this individually. Let's consolidate this. And then an entity is created. So this is what happened in France and seems to be existing elsewhere. Then basically when you sell your product, you have an extra charge that's for that entity so that they can take it back should they want to do that. So it's the experience from my end as a sort of manufacturer has been that there's kind of a little bit of charge to fund that circularity initiative that gets added in practice. That's kind of what I'm seeing. What we're doing that's a little bit different, that goes above and beyond that, is more of I think it's probably because Humanscale is a pretty innovative company and we're not afraid of risk and we're also willing to sort of test the waters. I think it's, we're sort of testing out, could we really make this a cycle that continues again and again? It doesn't always make sense for chairs to become more chairs. But there is a certain element of it where there are efficiencies. For example, we know what grade of nylon we use to make those chair bases to begin with. And so if we have our own injection molding machines and we have grinding machines, we can, and we've been testing this out, grind up previous chair bases and injection mold them as not the full material for the new parts, but a good portion of the material for the new parts. We can't do that with somebody else's product because we don't know what that material actually is. But for us,
you don't have the material data sheet. You don't know what it is. Yeah, exactly.
We don't know what grade of nylon it is. So there's things that we like when we replace the components. If we want to fix it up, maybe 80% of that chair can be reused if we replace 20% of the components of it. Certain screws, maybe their thread on them is worn. We just can replace those screws, or we can replace some parts of it. Well, we have those exact components. So the way we can fix up our chairs and what we can do with the material is at a higher value than what anybody else can do. And that's kind of what we're testing out. That's not always going to be the best and most efficient way for everything to be done, though. It's not the only way to do circularity. But the smaller you can make those loops, the more efficient at higher value you can keep that material, the larger the loops. Just generally, it tends to be that the farther out the loop, then you tend to be losing value. So like our chair being recycled by somebody else, for example, they probably would add that nylon into a whole batch of other nylon, and it would get a lower dollar amount sort of on the marketplace than what it would be worth to us, because for us, we can use it at a higher value.
Yeah, you need what you're talking about is really you want to level recycle and not downcycle, right?
Yes,
which could happen. Yeah, I mean, there's clothing, there's shoes, there's things that are made out of plastics. There's carpet that is, carpet nylon is made out of old bottles. But once it's done into that, you can't recycle it again. That's it.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because thinking of, I often find that the conversation of upcycling and downcycling is complicated. The bottles, the PE bottles that get turned into more PE bottles, from what I understand, looking into this, they seem to be able to do that many times. It's actually fairly robust. The PE is pretty good relative.
Yeah. It's not forever. It's not you can't forever. Just do it forever, but you can do it more than once for sure.
Yeah, but once you turn it into a fleece or something else, I don't know if you can recycle that again. So then that's
I mean, the thing is, once you start dyeing it different colors and mixing it and layering it and stuff like that, now then it gets less and less. Like you're saying, you take your nylon and put it back into the system that uses that nylon, you're great. As soon as you start mixing with other colors or other nylons, not so great. Now you're diminishing it, and pretty soon you're making brick pavers out of it. Right.
Yeah, which still have a value, but it's definitely a lower value.
They do, but you don't want to go from chair to brick paver.
Yeah,
you want some
absolutely.
steps in between there. You need to figure out how to get those steps in between there before that occurs. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So how do you do that with a chair?
So far, some of the biggest challenges are logistics challenges of like gathering the material, getting it to flow properly, and then also changing people's perceptions of what they expect. Is that, do you need every surface that's shiny to be perfectly shiny, or are you willing to accept, maybe a little bit of a patina, knowing that your chair has a 70% reduced carbon footprint? Like, it's significantly less, but would you be willing to accept a little patina for that? Those are some of the things we're also exploring to see, on the marketplace, can it accept some of these things that go along with reusing materials?
Let me ask you this: Do you agree or disagree with the statement that marketing has a responsibility there? And if not a responsibility, they have certainly the power to do that, right? And convince people that's it. Make it cool. There's a guy who in Columbus, Ohio, who purposely makes things so that they look like they're made out of recycled plastics. And he markets that as cool. And it's a great campaign. It works.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Exactly. And I think about like I happen to be in New York right now, and I think about the warehouses in Soho and Brooklyn, and like how it's not because they're brand new that they're cool. It's, it's the character, it's the history, it's the story behind it that makes it really interesting. So I think there are ways of making it, beautiful and interesting, that it doesn't always have to be every time exactly the same, every time like just shiny and new. That's one aesthetic. Maybe let's add some more other aesthetics. And I do think that's partly design and marketing, kind of thinking about things a little bit differently. So I put that challenge out to folks who might be listening in design, who work in design and marketing.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. I mean, they need to re-educate what is the shiny object that people want. You know what I mean? Because like it or not, marketing educates us on what we desire to have. They do. They just do. It's stronger than just a mild influence.
Yes.
It's a science, folks. They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. If you think you're really choosing stuff, think again. Maybe not so much. But that's really interesting. So how did you fall into this? Or how did you get yourself into this? Or was this a goal? Did you grow up saying, you know what, I want to be a chief sustainability officer?
I had never heard of this when I was growing up. But I think people often ask how I started being interested in sustainability, and that part I don't know. I feel like it's kind of always been part of my life. I'm Canadian, spent a lot of time camping as a kid. And,
oh, wow.
My parents always took us out to the woods a lot. I'm guessing that influenced things. I don't know for sure. But then as a young person figuring out what to do with myself and my life, I remember thinking about going into design. And my education is that I'm trained as an industrial designer, worked as one for about a decade. And I remember having a bit of a crisis thinking, if I go into design, I'm part of that system that's making stuff and things go to landfill and it's so destructive. And if I'm really good at it, then people will buy more stuff. And that's worse. And so I remember having that crisis even before university. And then, in the end, I realized that if I'm part of it, I can influence it. And I realized the power of that leverage point of that as in mass production, a decision gets made and repeated again and again, like hundreds, maybe millions of times a year. So it's really, I thought, actually, maybe I should go into it. And then as I was working at a few different consultancies in different places. My last design job was at Humanscale on the design team, where I was pretty vocal about sustainability. There came this opportunity to take on a sustainability project, and they asked me to lead it, which I then grew into like a department where I now report to the CEO. And I think it was partly I saw at the time I was like, I'm a designer. I do really fun things every day. I like, sketch pictures and get to see what I'm imagining in my brain come to life. Like it's really fun being a designer, at least it was for me. And I thought the only way I'm interested in taking on the sustainability project, which involves a lot of Excel sheets, is very different than being a designer, would be if I can try to influence the company. So I was, kind of told like, take on the project and then see what you can do. And so I guess in hindsight, it seems very linear. At the time, I felt like I had no idea what I was doing, and I didn't know what it would mean to like change the company.
So, I mean, in a sense, you came from the design, and we've talked about that before, that it starts with product design, right? So who better for the manufacturing and the sustainability of a manufacturer than somebody who is leading design?
It was a good spot to be in. I felt really grateful for having that.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you this, because obviously you have way more experience because I don't do it and you do. Is the thought, I was talking to people, I've had people from Primex Plastics on the show and other kind, ICPG Group and Dow and stuff like that. And, one of the things that they talk about is that we need to move towards what can we make out of the materials that are already been extracted rather than how do we make materials for my design, right? Is that kind of a thought process that is coming around? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the way it plays out in our design studio, because we're probably not as far reaching as the way they're probably looking in a bigger system than we are, is we tend to try to limit the materials to be the same. Like if we've taken the time to validate that this material doesn't have any carcinogens in it, we want the designers to use that again and again because we don't have to go through that work again. And then that also helps with when you go to recycle it in the end, you don't have 100 different materials you're dealing with. You might have 3 or 5 or a small number of different materials. So we try to just consolidate as much as we can into using vetted but small different amounts of materials.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So what's next for Humanscale? We've blown through an hour, by the way.
Yeah, it's been a good call. Let's see, what's next? Well, we are still, I'd say like waist deep in circularity, trying to really make sure that that's working and actually happening in practice. I think it's not something that gets solved quickly and in 2 or 3 months. So I do think that's going to be, to say we really got it solved is going to be a couple of years, I would suspect. And then other area we've been leaning into is more on the social side. So we just recently became a certified B Corp. And another area we've been looking at is, deep in the supply chains, the issues of forced labor and child labor that don't happen, within Humanscale, probably not even at our suppliers, but is really getting deep, into the material extraction, 4, 5, 6 levels deep in the supply chain is where we see the biggest issues tend to be.
Is that visibility or is the opaqueness being lifted with, more and more proliferation of, IoT devices, et cetera, and transparency of data and laws, et cetera? Is that becoming easier to see into the depth?
Easier and not great and perfect yet. So definitely the laws are doing a huge amount to then companies that didn't have it on their radar or didn't have any reason to have it on their radar now do have it on their radar. So there's so many more ways of looking at these things, so many more systems and tools to be able to say, how do you analyze for risk of child labor and forced labor? And of course, risk isn't a guarantee of what's actually happening. So that's the part where I don't think the world is there yet to understand like what's, you can analyze risk and get a good sense of like the likelihood of having child labor and forced labor. And all of that seems to track closely with audits. But if you want to know in your actual supply chain, it's still pretty hard to know what's really happening in your supply chain.
Yeah, because even going eyes on isn't always 100% accurate either, is it?
Yeah, there's always turnover. Every company has turnover. You can't go eyes on every day. Like, how often do you audit and how thorough is it? And Do they have 2 sets of books? And,
Yeah, so all you can really do is have a degree of reasonable audit and reasonable not suspicion, but you're reasonably confidence, I guess, reasonable confidence in that system and adhere to that. That's really interesting. I think it's really interesting as well. My last point that I just wanted to bring up, I thought it was really interesting that you guys go to the depths or go to the efforts of actually stating what is in each one of your chairs, right? And saying these the really kind of bold statements that other companies will not do. Just because unless they have to, they're not going to put those statements out there and put themselves at a risk. It seems like you guys are like, look, this is what we're doing. We can back this up. Go ahead and test us. Your legal department has got to be like some really cool people.
Yeah. We're not very risk averse, which is, I think, working in our favor in this, being able to show that it's possible. And I know, like, I've been involved in the world of kind of healthy materials for a little while now. I used to be on the board of directors for a group called Health Product Declaration Collaborative. And like 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, there was a lot of conversations about, like, can manufacturers share this? How many lawsuits are people going to be facing? I never saw those lawsuits coming to fruition, but it was a big risk at the beginning. People weren't sure, like, what was going to happen. But,
right.
It turns out it's actually more okay to share information than people might assume.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys are still on that cutting edge of being, willing to share that type of stuff, and I applaud that because people need to see that. The transparency needs to be there for people to have they call it wish cycling, et cetera. There's not a whole lot of confidence of people throwing stuff in a recycling bin and having it actually recycled. I mean, they just don't, and for good reason in many cases. But I applaud what you guys are doing. It's fantastic. Do you have any last words of wisdoms that you'd like to put out there, or just say how awesome I am and thank me?
You're amazing, and thank you.
Thank you.
Also, I guess I just wanted to put out just the thought that, like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. Like, taking some steps. Nobody's perfect. We'll never be perfect. Like, even if it's in your personal life or in your job, like, if you can take a step, it's still better than no steps. And we all do that. We get that much closer. Yeah.
Amen. Perfection can paralyze you for sure. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Jane Abernethy, it is Humanscale. And I think you go to humanscale.com, right?
Yep, exactly.
And we're talking about, like, you're going to buy, like, outfit an office building with your stuff, right? I'm not going to, like, buy this stuff for my home office, or can I?
You can, yeah. And that's a great idea to do that, because people often think that at home they don't have to worry about their body posture, but you're still spending a lot of time at that desk. It's still affecting your health. So yeah, it's available also for home office and e-commerce too. Okay, great. Yeah, fantastic. So check them out. Humanscale, and look at your designs and stuff like that are super cool. I love them. Awesome. Great stuff. Thank you so much, Jane. Everybody, listen, thanks for tuning in and downloading. And hey, peace and love.